The morning fog still clung to the trees of Pine Ridge Woods when I first saw her, Karen Whitfield, head of the HOA, striding across my land as if she held the deed. She moved briskly, snapping pictures with her phone raised high, documenting every tent, every piece of gear, and every vehicle neatly tucked between the pines. Her platinum hair bounced with each determined step as she slapped a bright orange violation notice onto the large oak at the trail's edge. She stepped back, admiring her work like a proud artist, then proclaimed loud enough to stir the birds that this area was an illegal camping zone in breach of community regulations. What Karen didn't know, and what would soon become her biggest mistake, was that she had just wandered into a restricted federal training ground. My name is Colonel Marcus Reynolds, recently retired after 25 years of service. 6 months ago, I returned to Willowbrook Estates and took over my family's 100-acre property, tucked just beyond the edge of the neighborhood's HOA authority. The land, bought by my grandfather in 1952, had remained in our family ever since. What few people knew was that for the past decade and a half, the Department of Defense had quietly used part of it for small-scale training navigation drills, survival instruction, and team exercises for elite military units. No heavy artillery, no noise, just discipline and practice in the woods. This arrangement predated the HOA by years, and the property lines were clear. Markers every 50 feet, and numerous signs warning trespassers to keep out. But Karen, self-appointed queen of the neighborhood, seemed to think none of that applied to her. In her 3 years as president, she'd handed out fines for mismatched mailbox paint, trash bins left in view too long, and non-regulation garden gnomes. So when we began setting up for the quarterly training, I wasn't surprised to hear from her. Military trucks rolled in, temporary shelters went up, and everything was conducted with the utmost professionalism. Still, in a neighborhood where twitching curtains were practically a pastime, the commotion didn't go unnoticed. I started receiving automated messages from the HOA, citing potential code violations. I ignored them at first, assuming someone would eventually consult a map and realize their mistake. Instead, 2 days later, I found a notice taped to my door, official letterhead and all, accusing me of violating Rule 12.3 of the community guidelines concerning unauthorized structures and camping. A $500 fine was included. I chose the polite route first. The next morning, I walked over to Karen's oversized, over-decorated house. She opened the door dressed like she was headed to a battlefield-themed board meeting, blazer and all, with HOA president stitched into the breast pocket. She scowled as soon as she saw me. Before I could even offer a greeting, she launched into a speech about community standards and how every property had to maintain a certain image. I let her finish. Then, calmly, I explained that the land in question lay outside her jurisdiction and was actively being used for military purposes, with full federal approval. I even offered to provide documentation. She actually laughed in my face. Then, in the kind of tone you'd use with a child pretending to be a pirate, she said it didn't matter if I claimed to be running Navy SEAL boot camp. Rules were rules, and I wasn't exempt. She ended the conversation by warning me that if I didn't remove the structures in 72 hours, she'd escalate things. 3 days later, she followed through. This time, it wasn't just a notice. She organized what she called a community safety walkthrough, which in reality was her and 2 other board members sneaking onto my land to take more photos and inspect the equipment. My security cameras caught them nosing around, even trying to peek inside some of the containers. That same afternoon, I contacted my lawyer, a retired JAG officer with a background in property law. He found the whole thing absurd. Not only had the HOA overstepped, but they'd also likely broken federal law. He suggested I send a cease and desist, which I did immediately. Karen didn't back down. If anything, the letter seemed to fuel her delusion of authority. Then came the tipping point. It was the following Tuesday, during a scheduled training session with about 20 service members deep in navigation drills, when Karen made her most outrageous move yet. She barged into the woods, phone in hand, shouting about community rules while recording everything she saw. So caught up in her self-righteous mission, she didn't even realize how badly she'd just crossed the line. She walked straight past the clearly posted warning signs, bright, bold placards that read, "Restricted Area. military training in progress. One of the sergeants calmly approached her, advising that for her own safety, she needed to leave immediately. But rather than backing down, she escalated. Loudly, she insisted that, as the HOA president, she had full authority over the land and accused us of trespassing. Then came the moment everything changed. She pulled out her phone and dialed 911. Her report? That there were armed squatters occupying community land and refusing to comply with HOA regulations. The county sheriff's department responded swiftly, dispatching 2 patrol vehicles. But the moment the deputies arrived, everything shifted. They saw military trucks, Department of Defense insignia, and were met by my command staff. The lead officer, a former military man himself, quickly recognized the situation. He called in his supervisor, while one of my lieutenants handed over our documentation, proof that the land was officially sanctioned as a Department of Defense training site. That's when Karen's confidence began to unravel. The officers informed her, in no uncertain terms, that she had no jurisdiction here. In fact, she had just committed a federal offense, trespassing on a restricted military installation. Still, she tried to argue, claiming the HOA's authority extended over all land in the subdivision. The supervisor calmly explained that federal law trumps HOA policies, and that she was in serious violation. As realization set in, her complexion shifted from defiant red to pale disbelief. The officers issued her a formal warning and escorted her off the property, making it crystal clear that any future interference would result in immediate arrest. She continued to rant about property values and community standards, even as she was walked away. One of the officers, almost as an afterthought, reminded her that disrupting military operations was a federal crime with severe penalties, steep fines, and the possibility of prison. Word of what happened spread through Willowbrook estates like dry grass catching fire. Within hours, the entire neighborhood knew that Karen had been removed by law enforcement after trying to meddle in an active military operation. Her usual grip on the HOA's Facebook page disappeared. No posts about fence paint codes or lawn heights, just silence. But not for long. The following morning, I got a call from an agent with the Defense Criminal Investigative Service. They were launching a formal review of the incident. Karen's repeated attempts to interfere, even after receiving a cease and desist letter, raised serious concerns. They asked for copies of our security footage, all HOA communications, and a timeline of events. The agent was professional but firm. Because some of our training operations touched on national security, the situation had to be handled carefully. That evening, the HOA board called an emergency meeting. I decided to attend. I brought with me a thick folder, full of legal documents, permits, signed agreements. The community center was packed. Nearly every resident showed up. Karen sat at the board's head table, but she looked different, nervous, quiet. Thomas Chun, the board's vice president, opened the meeting. He made it clear there were serious legal concerns about the HOA's recent actions. When it was my turn, I laid everything out. The original deed showing my land was outside HOA control, the official DoD authorization for training, the ignored cease and desist notice, and a letter from the U.S. Attorney's Office. That letter spelled it out in stark terms. Up to $250,000 in fines and 5 years in federal prison for interfering with military training. The room went silent. Thomas turned to Karen and asked if she had anything to say. She stood, visibly shaken, and claimed she was just doing her duty. But her voice faltered. One by one, board members reminded her that she had been told, repeatedly, that my land was exempt. She ignored every warning. Her excuses didn't hold. The vote was immediate, unanimous. Karen was suspended as HOA president, pending further investigation. The board also issued a formal apology to me and voted to clarify that my land was exempt from all HOA rules, permanently. But her problems weren't over. 2 weeks later, Karen got an official notice from the U.S. Attorney's Office. They weren't pressing criminal charges, but she was being fined $25,000 for trespassing and interfering with federal operations. The notice made it clear, next time there would be prosecution. Neighbors said she stood on her front lawn after reading the letter, yelling into her phone about constitutional rights and federal overreach. But she didn't stop there. In a last-ditch attempt to defend herself, Karen went online. She posted a long rant about being targeted for protecting the neighborhood. Worst of all, she attached photos, taken from my property, showing military vehicles and personnel that crossed a line she didn't even see. Federal authorities flagged the post within hours. It was considered a security breach, unauthorized photos from a restricted military training site. The next day, agents came to her door with another fine. This one, $50,000. The last anyone saw of Karen that day, she was sitting on her porch steps, clutching both fine notices in her hands, staring off into the distance in stunned silence, whispering again and again that she was just trying to enforce the rules.